Hey, I'm Brandon with Retro Archaeology, and in this part 3 video of my James Bond VHS experience, we're talking about Goldfinger. This is quintessential James Bond, quintessential Sean Connery James Bond, and really just an iconic film of the franchise. When I was collecting the Bond movies on the Drawer Box VHS edition, bigger box here, it was critical to me that I got a really clean copy of Goldfinger, and I'm really happy with the condition of this. It's in the running for the best condition CBS Fox James Bond VHS cases that I have. We have the iconic almost laser death scene for James Bond on the cover. Just a great moment in the movie that we're going to talk about in this video. But yeah, I love the way, that actually kind of fills the cover really, really well. And this is a movie that is definitely going to be in my top 5. I almost guarantee it. It's a movie that I remember seeing on TV a lot. As a kid, it was the one that would pull me in because the pacing of Goldfinger is absolutely torrid from start to finish. We're going to talk more about just how each scene builds on each other. But first, in tradition that I started in my last video, we're going to just analyze this box and really the description of the movie on the back. So the back of the box for Goldfinger says, stupendous, fast-paced entertainment with the sophisticated Sean Connery. So this is from 1964. If you remember the dates of our first 2 Bond movies, Dr. No in 62, From Russia with Love in 63, and Goldfinger in 64. So they were churning these things out one a year and really didn't have a miss on any of these first 3 so far. I like the entire Bond franchise, so it's going to be hard for me to call anything a miss, but we'll definitely probably have differing opinions. Goldfinger is an absolute masterpiece. So the description on the box says, the third of the thrilling Ian Fleming series, Goldfinger exhibits the malevolent villains and cliffhanging suspense that have made the James Bond adventures so enormously popular. The dashing agent 007 is currently pursuing ruthless millionaire Auric Goldfinger, suspected of criminally tampering with England's gold reserve. The excitement never falters from Goldfinger's heartless suffocation of his secretary by painting her body gold to Bond's ingenious escape from a deadly laser beam, which of course is the scene that they chose to put on the box art for this VHS release. Definitely a scene that is spoofed endlessly through spy TV shows and Austin Powers, and it's that ridiculous scene of being pinned down to the table with a laser beam potentially going to take you out from the crotch. Goldfinger would be spoofed through the Austin Powers movie Goldmember, because this truly is on the Mount Rushmore of the Bond franchise. So before we get into the movie, I just want to talk about the time period that I'm recording this video. It is 2024. It's actually the 60th anniversary of the movie Goldfinger this year. 60 years this movie has been around and stood the test of time. I've watched it on VHS this morning, and just like I'm watching all the Bond releases on VHS. But I do want to talk about the state of the Bond franchise a little bit on physical media, because you would think Goldfinger having its 60th anniversary, we would have a really special edition release of the movie. Believe it or not, the Bond franchise, the earlier films at least before Daniel Craig, are not released on physical media 4K. You can stream some of the earlier Bond movies digitally in 4K. However, that 4K stream is actually from an early 2000s master, from the DVDs to the Blu-ray, and they've never really had a proper 4K remaster from the original camera negatives with HDR. So we currently live in a state of 4K physical media where the older Bond films are still missing from that kind of field. And I do think Goldfinger in particular would be a film that would transfer extremely well to 4K. You think about the HDR on the iconic death scene of the gold body painted Jill Masterson, and she dies from suffocation. Imagine those colors popping in 4K, along with just the gold accents throughout the film, even Auric Goldfinger's suits and things like that really have the opportunity to pop in 4K. So I'm really hopeful that we do get all the Bond movies in 4K eventually. A box set all in 4K would be incredible. It's actually kind of part of the reason I'm enjoying experiencing these on 4:3 VHS standard def. I know eventually we are going to get proper 4K new masters of these movies, and that's when I'm going to jump in. Like, there's a great Blu-ray box set. These movies have been released to death. I could get them probably on cheap DVDs. I could get them on a cheaper Blu-ray set. But this is a really fun experiment as a channel called Retro Archaeology to go back to some of the earliest releases of these movies on VHS and really take them in. The big box VHS tapes, these are older tapes. And believe it or not, I find that older VHS, so we're talking really 70s and 80s, they hold up extremely well. The way they were recorded to tape, the tape itself, was actually a lot higher end. They got a lot cheaper in the 90s. So I have had some 90s tapes, whether it be cartoons or I used to have a Twin Peaks VHS box set, and the tapes are deteriorating and lacking quality that I find the older VHS tapes are holding. So I've been amazed so far, 3 films into this series, how well these tapes play. I mean, there is no static. There are no artifacts on the film itself. These VHS play extremely well. And I find that is the case with a lot of CBS Fox big boxes. I don't know if it's the drawer box just preserved the tape better or what, but I do think they're just a lot higher quality. So that's enough about the VHS. Let's talk about the movie Goldfinger. Definitely an absolute favorite for me. From the beginning, this movie just sets a pace that is absolutely outrageous. We get an opening scene before the amazing Shirley Bassey title song where Bond has to dispatch someone attacking him from behind. We get the really excellent visual cue of Bond sees his attacker in the female girl's eyes, and he dispatches this person by throwing them into a bathtub, electrocuting them with an appliance, kind of a precursor to another electrocution scene that happens later in the movie. So Bond likes electricity to dispatch his victims in the movie Goldfinger. But that's our opening scene. We go right into the Shirley Bassey song. This is the first Bond movie of the 3 so far that really sets that precedent of a theatrical sung theme song. And the Goldfinger theme song is iconic for the James Bond franchise. The opening credits with the gold body paint, the gold lady, and different kind of body parts and angles filling the frame really just sets up the mood for the film extremely well. The tones of the Goldfinger theme song are symphonically threaded throughout the movie, and this is just one of the top theme songs ever made for a Bond film. So right off the bat, I think the music sets up the vibe of this movie and the memorability of this movie. The song is catchy, the film is catchy because there's so many great iconic scenes, and this really establishes that trademark of a James Bond theme song presenting a movie, presenting the title, and really drawing you in from the get-go. From there, I just am blown away rewatching Goldfinger because it's been a while since I've seen it. I really am just blown away at the pacing of this movie. It is an action movie. It's a James Bond movie. It's a spy movie. It's a thriller. But it is a freaking action movie. And how perfect that this James Bond, compared to Dr. No in Jamaica, From Russia with Love, very European. This James Bond is very American. James Bond is in North America. We get Miami. We get Kentucky. It doesn't get much more an American heritage city than that. The Kentucky Derby, Fort Knox. All of these things are just this Americanized thread and theme in the movie Goldfinger. And I bring that up with this movie being such an iconic action movie, is I don't know if Goldfinger gets enough credit for really kind of establishing some tropes and stylings that would really grow into what we consider the modern action movie. I think a lot of people want to point to the 70s and Westerns And then, the rise of the action heroes, Stallone and Schwarzenegger in the 80s is really like growing and ballooning the action movie. But I don't know if any of that happens to the degree of action and stunt work if we don't have the movie Goldfinger, because there is so much that happens in this movie, so many great scenes. From the golf scene, which is fantastic, and I do want to dive into that more. From the golf scene, we get an awesome car chase scene. After that car chase scene, we get another car chase scene where Bond is trying to kind of infiltrate Auric Enterprises and has to use all his gadgets to kind of dispatch people. You think he's trapped, and he uses the ejector seat, and the car chase keeps going. The car gets shot up by the old woman gate guard with the machine gun. It just builds and builds and builds and really doesn't let up pacing all that much. Oddjob basically establishes that iconic James Bond henchman villain where you have like the main villain and then you have his henchman, his like right-hand man who does all the dirty work for him and is that like powerful brute force. Oddjob establishes that in Goldfinger. And the scene where Bond and Oddjob kind of have their final showdown really actually reminded me of the final showdown at the end of Die Hard, an iconic action movie. You've got John McClane and you've got Hans Gruber's main henchman, forget his name at the moment, but they have a huge brawl that's kind of been building up to that showdown. I think Goldfinger deserves more credit for its contributions to the action movie and stunt work, because there's a lot of it in Goldfinger that plays really well. So I want to go back a moment to earlier in the film. I do tend to jump around a little bit in these videos, just kind of getting excited about one thought to another. I do want to go back to the golf scene, because it's amazing how memorable that scene is, despite it not being an action scene in this movie. There is something about a gentleman's game of golf between our secret agent and our main villain, Auric Goldfinger, and this almost like game of chess on the golf field to outwit and outsmart Auric Goldfinger. So what James Bond does is, kind of detects that Goldfinger is cheating. He's using multiple balls. He's got a Schlesinger 1 and a Schlesinger 7. And James Bond picks up on that, kind of exchanges the balls. Goldfinger doesn't know, golfs his final shot with his cheated ball, and Bond kind of catches him red-handed when he pulls the ball out and says, "Didn't you putt a different numbered ball?" It's such a smart moment for Bond. It's a moment that shows the character is not just action bravado hero. He's smart. He's willing to outwit his enemies. He is willing to bring his enemies down a peg. And that happens a lot in this movie. That really is a theme of James Bond continuously outwitting Goldfinger. Goldfinger thinking he has the upper hand. He kind of is just this like big child who never wants to lose and always wants to put on this front that he's got everything under control. But James Bond continuously outwits him, from the card game where Goldfinger is cheating to the golf game to some of the car escapes to the plane at the end where Goldfinger gets sucked out the window. It's just a series of Goldfinger like making his move, thinking he's got all the answers, but Bond continuously outwits him. And there's such satisfaction in that as the viewer. You really feel like it's like move, counter move, or Goldfinger trying to deflect Bond in another direction, Bond figuring it out and really getting out of that jam, or really like catching him red-handed in the act of something. So I love that golf scene just really kind of gives Bond a moment to showcase his intellect and his awareness of the situation. Like, it showcases how Goldfinger is a cheat, he is a scam artist, but Bond is going to do what he needs to do to kind of detect those scams and really break him out of it. Fantastic scene. After that golf scene, we have to talk a little bit more about the car chase scene with Tilly Masterson, the character that is supposed to be the sister of our gold suffocation victim from earlier in the film. So let's talk a little bit about those two sisters. I remember the gold painted Jill Masterson as a young kid seeing this movie on TV. Like, that is imagery that will always stay with me. I'd never seen anything like it. The way the camera kind of shoots across the room, the way our body is strewn across the bed, and just a sleek female body completely covered in gold paint. I had never seen anything like that. That was an image that always stayed with me thinking about this film. And I think it's such an effective image in this movie. It establishes that theme of gold, but in a menacing way. I think we think of gold as jewelry and money and worth and a valuable kind of commodity. But in this case, gold is literally what killed this poor woman. Her skin literally suffocated being covered in gold body paint. So I do think that's just writing wise from Ian Fleming, just a brilliant setup for early in the film that immediately gives you the sense, oh, this Goldfinger guy or this business that Bond is wrapped up in is serious. There's not just a silencer taking somebody out. They're drugging a victim and suffocating her skin with gold paint. Very menacing. So we talked a little bit about Jill Masterson. Let's fast forward back to Tilly Masterson in this car chase scene. This is where we really get introduced to James Bond's iconic car, the Aston Martin DB5. The Aston Martin would be associated with Bond forever because of this movie. It all starts here. Vehicles in general are something any common fan would associate with the movie franchise James Bond. But this is really the first like full-fledged car-involved action movie that we get in the James Bond franchise in the third film. And after this, there's no turning back. When you have this scene between James Bond's gorgeous, fully loaded and tricked out silver Aston Martin, and you partner it with an American set movie with a white 1964 Ford Mustang convertible, and then you have the following of Goldfinger. This scene is unbelievable. Not only the two cars that are featured on screen here, but the location. The location is part of what makes this scene such a success. There's a shot where Tilly has her sniper rifle. She has the highest ground. Bond's in the middle ground. And Oddjob and Goldfinger in their car are at the lowest point. And there's a shot behind all of that pulls back when we see Tilly. It's such a gorgeously framed shot, really taking advantage of the elevation. You have different levels of the frame, different levels of characters, and it's just a beautiful shot and use of location in an already thrilling scene. So that was a cinematography element that really stood out to me in the movie Goldfinger, and just a frame that I love. Seeing Tilly, seeing Bond, seeing the cars, and then seeing Goldfinger at the bottom of the hill. But this chase scene is awesome. I think we get, Bond in all of his suaveness with another female, definitely showing his bravado and ability to drive and, not letting her pass. He uses the spoke coming out of the wheel as a car gadget for the first time. Many more car gadgets to come in this movie. And it's a shame we don't get more of Tilly. Like, it's almost like Janet Leigh in Psycho. Like, when she is revealed in that car, you kind of think, oh, this is the Bond girl. This is going to be like the Tatiana of this movie. She's going to be in this for a while. But Tilly gets taken out. Gets taken out by the henchman Oddjob only a few scenes later. As I was watching that scene, I kind of forgot, what happened to Tilly's character after this encounter with Oddjob. We see him throw the hat, and the hat collides with her as she's running away. She's actually killed in this scene. It's a little bit of a fault of the movie that it just so quickly moves on, so quickly goes into the interactions with Bond and Goldfinger, but Tilly is killed by Oddjob in this movie with his hat. Maybe it's the horror fan in me, but as I was watching that scene, I couldn't help but think, what if Oddjob's hat actually decapitated her as she's running away? They never would have done it in 1964. That's not this style of movie, but the fact that Oddjob beheads a stone mannequin just a few scenes earlier and literally throws this hat at this poor girl running away and it collides with her, I couldn't help but have the thought, how impactful would it have been and just shock value of this movie if she had been decapitated? I don't know. Maybe it's a deleted scene or an alternate cut in my mind, but really interesting. So she's taken out early, and the next Bond girl we get in Goldfinger is one of the most memorable names in the franchise, Pussy Galore, where Bond gets to walk around and says, "Hello, Pussy." And it's just such a goofy name. We haven't really had a name this goofy since Dr. No. We talked about how From Russia with Love played Tatiana Romanova very seriously. The female characters in the first half of Goldfinger, not that outlandish of names, but we get that like Bond awakening shot where the focus comes in and we see Pussy Galore for the first time. And we find out her name, and it's just absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely over the top. Her voice is a little bit nails on the chalkboard for me, so I can't say she's one of my favorite Bond girls, but I do think her arc is very interesting because she is like kind of villainous throughout most of the movie. She's very sharp-witted. She has a very sharp voice, very skilled as her Pussy Galore's flying circus. She's like the coach and a key element of Goldfinger's operation. So I do think it's kind of cool how she ends up being the one that Bond turns over, that allows the Americans, the military, to be alerted. She's behind the poison gas getting changed to something non-lethal. The soldiers all fake falling down, which allows Bond to really kind of foil Goldfinger's plans. So I do think Pussy Galore has a very interesting arc and is a strong female character. But I can't help but just, chuckle at her name in the context of this movie. And her voice almost sounds like she would have been the one singing the theme song, the Shirley Bassey theme song. Like, her voice with Shirley's singing voice almost sound like the same person. So I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it's kind of funny how those two things play off each other. It's impossible to talk about Goldfinger and not talk about the iconic laser scene where Bond is almost cut in half from the crotch up. Terrible way to go for anybody, but especially for a guy, and especially for James Bond, who, through all implications, is quite the lover. So in this scene with Goldfinger and Bond tied down, this would just be spoofed endlessly through various animated things, sci-fi things. Look up Goldfinger spoof, and there's tons of them. But I think just the setup is so memorable because it's really Bond in his most vulnerable position yet. I talked about in From Russia with Love when he's kind of held at gunpoint by Robert Shaw's character, and it's the first time Bond looks concerned in that movie. Before that, it's the tarantula scene in Dr. No. Goldfinger's moment of vulnerability really is this laser scene. Outside of this scene, you never really feel a massive threat to Bond like you do with a laser potentially cutting him in half. But has just a great line from Goldfinger here. "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die." The way he delivers it, the setup of the scene, the visual of the laser, the effect of the table getting cut by the laser was absolutely really well done and just really convincing, just kind of creating that element of danger. This is just a beautifully framed scene, an iconic Bond moment. It's a moment you think of when you think of the James Bond franchise, and it's definitely a top 3 moment you think of with Sean Connery as James Bond. After the laser scene, I really like how the movie transitions to Kentucky and builds to that Fort Knox climax scene. There's just a lot of really good moments in this second half, like Bond and Goldfinger sharing a mint julep and talking about Goldfinger's operation. We get some of the plane flight scenes with Pussy Galore's flying circus and learn more about how that's going to kind of integrate into the plot. We get the two agents observing Bond and trailing Oddjob, and it's really just one series of events that continue to move the movie along really well. By the time we get to the assault on Fort Knox, there's just so much to look forward to. You think the movie ends in about 4 different places, but the movie keeps going. Like the soldiers waking up when you think they're dead and all was a ploy, assaulting Fort Knox, foiling Goldfinger's plans. The brawl between Bond and Oddjob that I talked about earlier goes on. I love that Bond throws a chunk of gold at Oddjob and it just bounces off his chest. I love that scene where Bond gets Oddjob's hat and Oddjob is like, "Oh, I gotta like dodge this thing. And it gets stuck in the metal bars, and he goes to fetch it, and of course, Bond dispatches his second victim with electricity in a bold way. Like the amount of sparks and attention they gave to that death of Oddjob was so well done. It wasn't just a quick burst, a shock through his body. They added all these sparks and visual appeal. And then, of course, Bond stops the bomb at 007. An element of fun that this movie has all the way through that scene. Then we think the movie is over. Feels like a fitting conclusion, but it's not. Goldfinger is on the plane. There's one final showdown. He gets sucked out the window, something that's alluded to earlier in the movie. There's a lot of foreshadowing, whether it be the electrical death in the beginning, to Oddjob's death, to the firing on a plane. There's a lot of foreshadowing in this movie, but it's just a tremendously fun film for all the reasons I've mentioned so far. The pacing is incredible. The visuals are great. The characters are iconic. Goldfinger is this big kind of like whiny baby who thinks he's got it all figured out, but Bond foils him in every attempt, and it's so satisfying to watch. It's just such a entertaining movie that is such a great action film, a great Bond film, a great Connery film. So I would love to know what you think of Goldfinger. What are your favorite scenes? Bond has some really good quips in this, even at the beginning when he says shocking, simply shocking, or whatever, when he dispatches that first victim. There's some other great lines, just some great quick things that Bond says. What are your favorite moments from almost said Goldmember. What are your favorite moments from Goldfinger? And where does this movie rank in your Bond favorites? It's definitely high up there for me. I'm going to save all my rankings for the end, but Goldfinger is going to be near the top for sure. So thank you for watching part 3, the third James Bond movie in the great franchise on VHS. Comment, like, subscribe, and keep following as we move on to our 4th Bond film in the series this July. Thanks.